Good day, I'm Martin Gago with Market Radius Research. It's Wednesday, February the 15th. We got CEO Bruce Counts of Storm Exploration joining us today. Storm's a mineral exploration company with 4 district-scale gold projects in northwestern Ontario and some top jurisdictions there. Storm's got a great team, some great investors in a great district, and Bruce is here to tell us about the company, its properties, and its plans. But please remember, this is not investment advice. We're here to learn about the company. Bruce, thank you very much for joining us today. And yeah, please tell us about Storm.
Oh, thank you very much for having me, Martin. As you mentioned, Storm is a mineral exploration company. Our projects are in northwestern Ontario. And yeah, happy to talk to you about those properties and what we're planning to do in the next 12 months.
Excellent.
So, we'll start with our forward-looking statements, and these are typical, everybody says these, but this is kind of my opportunity to remind people that we are early stage exploration, so there's a lot of risk involved. Of course, if we're successful at what we're trying to do, then, the reward can be staggering. But just as a reminder for people, I think that's the appropriate place to say that.
Yep.
So to render it down, we have 4 district scale properties in northwestern Ontario. Our primary project has a fair amount of drilling on it, so it's still got all that discovery potential and the lift that you get from discovery, but there's enough drilling, historical drilling, for us to know that the property is well endowed with gold. And in fact, all our properties have had some historical work to tell us that we're in the right jurisdiction. Got a great team of people to explore on these, some with very specific experience in the kind of deposit that we're looking for, and we'll get into that in a second. But equally important, we have fantastic shareholders that I like to call durational capital. So they continue to support the company as it goes through the exploration process and cycles. Catalyst coming up for this year, the big one, of course, is always drilling. That's really where you add the big value to any companies at the end of the drill bit. But there's also another First Nations related catalyst that I think will also be important for the company on a go-forward basis. So don't hesitate to stop me if you have any questions at any point, right, Martin?
That's the way it goes.
Snapshot of the corporate structure. Recently did a restructuring of the company, so we have just over 41 million shares outstanding. We've been trading in that sort of 12 to 14 cent range, so it gives us about a market cap of about $5 million Canadian. Great set of shareholders, and I'll draw your attention to the company names on the bottom. They've been very supportive throughout the whole process. And I think actually the institutions are a little bit higher than that. I've just been doing a recalculation, and it's probably closer to 18%. So great support from the institutional sector, as well as high net worth and family office support. Management, well aligned with shareholders. I own 4%, but the team itself as together owns about 10%. So, it's for such a small market cap company, really proud of the shareholders we've been able to assemble and support the company.
Bruce, you mentioned you restructured the company. I don't want to get into the whole history of it, but can you just give us a quick snapshot on exactly what it was, how it got restructured, just so Sure. If there's any sort of skeletons in the closet, as they say?
Absolutely. So right at the beginning of 2023, so in January of 2023, we did a consolidation of 4 shares, 1 new share for each 4 old shares. Yep. So at that point, we were trading in the 2 to 3 cent range. And I'm sure you're aware, raising money below 5 cents on the venture exchange comes with a whole set of rules and regulations and doesn't give the company a lot of flexibility. And we felt that it would be more attractive structure if we consolidated the shares on a 4-for-1 basis.
All right.
1 for 4, I should say, the other way around. Any other questions before I move on?
Move on.
Okay. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're early stage exploration. So I believe that it's really important to make sure as much of the money we raise goes into the ground as possible. So I run a very lean operation. I'm actually the only full-time employee of the company. I share my CFO with another publicly traded company, and then rely on, I've been in this business for 30 years. So I have a great network of consultants and contractors that I rely on to help push the thing forward. And if we get to the point where we need to start staffing up, because we've made a great discovery, we can look at doing that at that point. But while we're early stage exploration, keep it lean, make sure the money's going into the ground. I'll just touch on the advisors as well. I think it's really important, particularly those top 2, Rob Carpenter and John Williamson. Both equally astute geologists, but also understand how to form a company, an exploration company. They both had successful discoveries and then subsequent sales to producers. So, having that understanding of how to structure a business deal, as well as make sure the company is prepared for sale ultimately, is really important. Rob actually wrote his PhD on iron formation hosted gold deposit of one called Meliadine. And that is our primary project, which is called Miminiska, and we'll get into that, is an iron formation hosted gold exploration project. So great to have that kind of depth of experience. And equally important, John Williamson was on the discovery team of what was back in the day called George and Goose Lake. Now that's called Back River these days. Again, it's an iron formation hosted gold deposit. And that was recently the subject of a transaction between Sabina and B2 Gold. So, it's been in the news. It's an important class of gold deposits, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well.
Bruce, sorry, just can you dig into Bruce's and John's, Rob's and John's, their background? Can you just sort of highlight some of the transactions, some things they've been involved with there?
Sure, absolutely. Rob was a founder and the CEO of a company called Kaminak, which found the Coffee Gold Deposit in the Yukon. That sold ultimately to Goldcorp, which is now Newmont, for about $520 million. So great discovery there, and that Rob led that team, made that discovery. And then John Williamson, John's had several exits throughout his career. He runs and is the principal of a group called the Metals Group of companies. Probably the most well-known company within that group is called Benchmark Metals. I think they're approaching 5 million ounces equivalent of gold and silver up in the Golden Triangle. And his group has raised well over $200 million in the last couple of years. So, John's, again, a very astute geologist, but also a high degree of business acumen as well.
And then actually just pointing at the focus onto you, can you just dig into your background a little bit deeper?
Sure. So as I mentioned, I've been in the business 30 years. The first year, 10 or so were technical. I started out my career working for BHP on what would become Canada's first diamond mine. And I worked there right from the very first discovery into the breaking of the ground for the mine. And then, mining wasn't really my passion, exploration was. So I went over and started working for the junior, which had a 29% stake in that Ekati diamond mine. That was a company called Diamet. And I worked there, and until the company, we sold it to BHP, and that was about an $800 million US transaction. I watched, one of the things that made me so excited about being involved in this industry is I watched the Diamet stock, again, 29% stake in that project. They went from about 25 cents when I first got started to $65 in less than 2 years through that whole discovery process. So, the kind of staggering wealth that gets created through discovery was something that it certainly ignited a passion for me in exploration. And I've been in the business ever since. Last 20 years or so have been on the corporate side, so either as an officer or director of a publicly traded company, made a few discoveries, none of which wound up being economic, but certainly very good for the shareholders, like one exit where people had the opportunity to take sort of 9 times their money off the table through discovery, which didn't wind up being economic, but still an important discovery and an opportunity for people to make money.
All right.
So look, we take our responsibility with ESG very seriously, and we're have a very strong relationship with First Nations. And one of the catalysts for the company coming up is that we are deeply in negotiations with First Nations on an exploration agreement, and that's taken quite a while. But we feel very strongly that you need to have a strong and supportive relationship with the First Nations in the area where you're working. So one of the catalysts coming up for the company is that we expect to sign a first agreement with First Nations on our primary project in the next few months. So we'll be looking for that. I think that will be important for the market to see. It's taken almost, we've been discussing with them almost a year now. So, it's been a fairly slow process for a number of reasons, not the least of which has been COVID. But we are very close to getting an agreement signed, I believe. And I think that will be an important catalyst for the company on a go-forward basis.
Definitely.
So let's talk a little bit about the projects and where we're located. We've got 3 projects up in the Fort Hope area. That's the First Nations name is Abimatong. Our primary project is the Miminiska project. So you can see that is the center one of those 3 projects, Keezhik, Miminiska, and Attwood. And then we have a fourth project down in the Fort Frances area. It's about 65 kilometers north of Fort Frances, called Gold Standard. This is as you mentioned, it's a great jurisdiction. It's obviously well known for its gold. I think more than 200 million ounces of gold have been mined out of the northwestern Ontario. So it's not only got great mineral endowment, but it also has a history of mining. So you've got, a knowledge within the communities, but also all the goods and services that are needed to go from exploration right through to mining, modern health and safety standards, loss of infrastructure. So a great place to be exploring for gold.
How is the Ontario government right now, just a little off topic, in terms of supporting the mining industry right now? Are they in a good space on that?
Yeah, very supportive. In fact, recently at the roundup, I had an opportunity to meet with the minister, Ontario's minister for mining, and very supportive and very encouraging. I think they're working hard to make sure that it's as smooth as possible when to get your permits, to be able to explore, and to work with First Nations.
All right.
So just a little bit of what we have been doing and what we've got coming up ahead of us. But the key takeaways here are, what are the catalysts for us? Well, again, I mentioned that we're very close to signing an MOU, or exploration agreement, with First Nations on both projects. So not only the Miminiska and the other two projects we have in the Fort Hope area, but also our Gold Standard project down near Fort Frances. And then it's going to be all about drilling. We'd like to see our drilling campaign start this year in Q2 at Miminiska, our primary project. But we would also like to do a little bit of drilling at Gold Standard, where we identified a really compelling base metal target earlier this year. Now, I'm going to zoom in a little bit closer to the Fort Hope area. Well, again, this is where the primary project for the company is. That's Miminiska. That's the one in the center. And you can see its relationship to the local First Nations community of Fort Hope, or Ebamatong. I'd also draw your attention to the Musselwhite mine, which is about 175 kilometers to the northwest of the project area. So Musselwhite is our closest analog. It is an iron formation hosted gold deposit, currently owned and operated by Newmont. It's my understanding it's one of their best performing assets, which is interesting because it's a fly-in, fly-out operation with a short winter road season to bring in bulk supplies. And even despite the fact that it's remote, is a great performer, a great asset for Newmont. So speaks to the quality of banded iron formation hosted gold deposits as a class of gold deposit.
Bruce, I'd like to dig into a little bit and sort of get a little nerdy on the geology. Like,
you bet.
It's not like I'm not I'm not a geo here. Like a lot of talk about porphyries and other things typically. Can you just sort of give us like a brief overview on what an iron hosted banded formation is? Just like, how is it mined? Like just a quick primer on that kind of
absolutely. I'll just if you'll let me, I'll just skip down to this slide, because I do a bit of I do talk about this because it is a really important class of gold deposit. They tend to be a little bit larger. They have fairly large footprints and higher grades. So, that tends to mean they're higher margin. Producers really like them. Look, we're an exploration company. Our forte is exploration. Our goal here is to make a discovery that would entice a producer to either buy the project or the company. So we're always kind of looking at what do producers like in terms of projects. And they like banded iron formation hosted gold deposits because they've got that multi-million ounce potential. They've got that higher grade and higher margin. But equally important, they tend to be very consistent in the gold mineralization. You don't get, it's not nuggety gold, it tends to be very consistent day to day. So a producer, that's attractive because, they know the kind of ounces they're going to get on a day-to-day basis as long as they pull in the ore out, or they're pulling the ore in. Tend to be, generally they're mined underground. That doesn't mean they can't start with an open pit, like a starter pit, but generally these are underground mines. The other thing that's important about banded iron formation hosted gold is they tend to be, and this is a generalization, but they tend to be fairly simple metallurgically. So it's easy to get the gold out. You don't need a big complicated chemical process to extract that gold. And so you get high recoveries. So all of these things together make them very attractive targets for producers. This is some of the more well-known banded iron formation hosted gold deposits in North America. You can see Musselwhite on there, just over 6 million ounces at plus 5.3 grams per ton. The other one that I would point out here is Lupin, because I'm going to draw some comparisons to our Miminiska project and Lupin as we go forward through the presentation.
So the mineralization isn't in like a vein kind of structure. It's more dispersed like a porphyry, or?
No, well, it does tend to be, it's associated with veins and it's associated with the iron formation. So, to keep I don't want to get it too complicated, go too far down the technical rat hole, but you can imagine these fluids as they infiltrate a faulting, things are all broken up. They're traveling up these faults and they hit the iron formation, and the iron reacts with the fluids, drops out sulfides like pyrrhotite and pyrite and arsenopyrite, and the gold out separately. So when it gets caught up in these veins, and it's associated right where you're in with that iron formation. So when you're looking for the thickest part of the iron formation, so you have the most surface area, and the places where it's the most broken up, so that you can get those fluids in there. Does that make sense?
Yep, that makes total sense. Okay, thank you. Excellent primer on that.
No problem. So I'll just go back up. I want to talk quickly about the acquisition terms for Miminiska and Keezhik. Those are the two projects. I'll just go back up here. Those are the two projects we're earning 100% interest in those projects from a London-listed company called Landor. These were non-core assets to Landor, and we struck a deal to acquire 100% interest in them. And so these are the deal terms, and you'll see that we're a little over halfway to having paid the bill. It's just over $4 million over the course of 2.5 years to acquire the 100% interest. There's a cash component, then there's a share component. We can elect to pay the shares either in cash or shares. That's our choice to make at the time. So we just look at that and what makes sense at each payment point. Landor does retain a 2% NSR, but we can buy back 1% for $1 million. So those are pretty standard terms on the acquisition. Yeah. And I think it was a very fair price given the quality of the assets that we're acquiring from Landor. So with no further ado, let's get into Miminiska, because this is the flagship project for the company. It is our primary focus. And when you're a $5 million market cap, $5 to $10 million market cap company, it's really important to focus on an area where you're going to be able to add the most value quickly. So because your cost of capital is really high when you're a low market cap, so you want to make get as much excitement and discovery potential realized in the market as quickly as possible, so that you can explore it less expensively or less dilutively, if you will. So a little bit of a backstory on the project here. There were some discoveries at Miminiska and Franz. So they're the two sort of the east and west ends of this land package. Those discoveries were made in the 40s. And so they were simply made because they're right on the shore of a lake. And so they were, seen by early prospectors in the 1940s. So claims were initially staked then, and these are patented claims where we have these two showings. And though there was a round of drilling in 1944 on both Frond and Miminiska, then another round of drilling in 1987, but really just to repeat a lot of the drilling that happened in 1944. Then there's no activity on the project until Landor picks it up, no drilling activity, I should say, until Landor picks up the projects in the late 1990s and does 3 years of drilling through 2003 to 2005, but focused only on that Miminiska prospect. So that's the one that you see in the southwest of the property. So a couple of things. What attracted us to this project? That historical drilling, very exciting. We're seeing mineable grades and mineable widths in the historical drilling, but the drilling wasn't so extensive that they've basically killed the project. No, in fact, they've left it wide open, and we'll get into how we think we can grow ounces at Miminiska. But I think also important, Martin, is that when you see mineable grades and mineable widths at both ends of a 12-kilometer belt of rocks, you can be pretty certain, particularly in banded iron formation hosted gold deposits, that you'll see more gold between them. And in fact, you can see there's one drill hole that was exploratory in nature. It drilled in the 80s. That came up with 28 grams over 1.5 meters. Never followed up, but I think it's really important as we sort of, from a strategic point of view, that we continue to look at the whole property and develop targets, not just Miminiska and Frond, but what other targets might there be between. But in the short term, as I mentioned, we've got to get our price up. We've got to make the exploration of this project less dilutive. So how do we get the cost of capital lower? Well, we focus in where we've got our so-called low-hanging fruit, and that's really at the Miminiska prospect itself, over in the southwest. So the next couple of slides are going to look specifically at that prospect.
Sorry, Bruce, just going back to that, like it is, you've got the two areas that have been drilled, and that's what, 12 kilometers in
about 12 kilometers
two?
separating them. Yes.
Gotcha. Yeah, and then you've done some grab sampling and some surface exploration, or
No, not really. These are what you're looking at is historical results.
Okay.
So there were some grab samples and stuff collected between the two showings, and there's we're seeing gold showings in the grab samples that were done, but we want to focus our efforts really down at Miminiska proper at the showing, because again, that's where we can add value. Look, strategically, what we'd like to do in addition to the drilling at Miminiska is to fly the whole property with some sort of an airborne EM system to help identify additional targets that we can develop on a go-forward basis. But again, our drilling will be focused, our near-term drilling will be focused at the Miminiska prospect.
Well, that makes sense. You get the biggest sort of de-risk drilling there. You've already got a lot of, or there's relatively a fair amount of information there, so you can leverage off of that. Then once you hopefully get your market cap up and cheaper capital, then you can go after the other things and see what opportunities lie there.
Exactly. And the benefit to us also was the fact that Landor had that 3,000 meters of the drill core that they drilled between 2003 and 5 in Thunder Bay. So we could retrieve that core and get a firsthand look at what does the style of mineralization, what do we need to be looking for? What are the key sort of takeaways from looking at that? And how does that, focus us on a go forward basis?
All right.
So here what I've done is we're focused in on this Miminiska showing proper. And what I've done is I put the trace of the banded iron formation. So imagine it looks like a sheet that's sort of vertical or near vertical in its orientation that's been folded into that Z pattern. And that's through a shearing process. So imagine the rocks are sort of going like this, and they're creating this sort of folded, we call it a Z fold in the business, of this iron formation. What I've done is I've compared it to the Z fold of iron formation at the Lupin mine. And both of these maps are at the same scale. So you can see, our banded iron formation is a little larger, and there are two of them. But I think the important takeaway here is that we could have a multi-million ounce deposit right here at the Miminiska showing. Forget about Front, which is 12 kilometers away, and all that prospective ground I've been talking about between them. You could have a multi-million ounce deposit right here at Miminiska. Lupin was 3.4 million ounces of gold at 9 grams per ton. A great little mine for Echo Bay back in the 1980s, and ran for about 20 years. Another important thing to know about banded iron formation hosted gold is that they can have incredible depth extent as well. So, for instance, Lupin was 9 grams at surface. They stopped mining at 3,600 meters depth, and they were still in 9-gram material. So again, great depth extent and very consistent rock and grades. So, one of the things, again, that drew us to the whole Miminiska area was most of that historical drilling had only been testing the top 150 meters of the system. So, we looked at this and we thought, okay, we could have multi-million ounce deposit here. Where do we need to be focusing on this? So this is a busy map. There's a lot of information here, but really, if you want to sort of render it down, what's important? In those black ellipses, that's where we're seeing the mineable grades and mineable widths. So where you can see, this is an area where we felt pretty strongly we can expand gold mineralization both laterally and vertically within those areas. But one of the things that we did when we looked at that core from Landor was that we could see that the mineralization is associated with these sulfide minerals, pyrrhotite, arsenopyrite, pyrite. These are conductive minerals. And no one had run a ground electromagnetic survey, in other words, something to measure the conductivity of the rocks over this prospect. So we did that. And then we looked at the conductivity response over where we knew we had these mineable grades and mineable widths, the good mineralization. And then we looked for other areas along the iron formation where we had a similar response. That's highlighted by these red ellipses. So you can see that there's lots of areas where we see no drilling. The banded iron formation has seen no drilling, but we see very compelling evidence of sulfide and likely gold mineralization that we can go and test with drilling. So again, not only are we expanding and extending the mineralization where we know we have good results, we've got areas to sort of grow that as well, so that we can, eventually get to that multi-million ounce deposit. That's certainly the goal here. I think it's really important to point out at that nose of that fold that's never been drilled. I mean, this is one of the places where you really want to focus your efforts, is at the nose of the fold, because again, you've got it's a thickening because you brought it around, the rocks around, and so you've thickened it by the folding, but also that folding creates a lot of fracturing as well. So you get that ability for the fluids to infiltrate the iron formation at its thickest part. That's a really important exploration target for us. We've got a great conductor there that looks a lot like where it's very similar in character to where we have gold mineralization. So that is like a key place where we want to start drilling right away in 2023.
And sorry, the nose, that's more sort of on the northeast corner there.
I don't know if you can see my
okay,
cursor
right
there. That's the nose of the fold. That's seen, no drilling through the center of that thing. And it is the place where we are most excited to start our drilling.
Is that analogous to maybe where some of the other iron banded formations on their noses of the
Absolutely.
fold?
The aha moment for Lupin came at the nose of the fold, right? That was when they went, okay, now we see we're onto something. So, that can be a critical component in building your tons.
All right. And do you have a drill plan yet for this, or just a little more on the conceptual side?
No, we do. We have sort of between 8 and 12 holes. You always want to leave a little bit of flexibility so that when you're looking at the core, you can say, okay, look, we need to move the drill a little bit over this way or steepen the hill. So what we're looking at 8 to 12 holes. We somewhere between 2,000 to 2,500 meters of drilling is what would be desirable.
Gotcha. And is the goal of it, is it to kind of confirm some of the historic stuff, just to sort of validate the data, as well as, and I presume you're looking for more kind of structural information, as opposed to, like, you're not trying to expand ounces or anything like that?
Yeah, we're at this point, we're not trying to establish a resource or even go down that road. There are a couple of things. Yes, you want to understand, validate the historical information, which we're very comfortable would be, we have the drill core from Landor. But also to start getting an understanding of what the orientation of that sheet. Remember, I said it kind of looked like a sheet. Well, is that sheet vertical? Is it tilted a little bit? Is it plunging different ways? And the best way to understand that, and the structure, which is so important about delivering those gold-bearing fluids into the rocks, you want to understand that. But really, I mean, if you were to render it down, what's the goal? We need to convince ourselves internally that you could have millions of ounces here. So it's important to test areas that have never been tested as well, to see that you can grow that footprint into something that would be millions of ounces. We're not interested in finding a couple 100,000 ounces. To attract a producer, you need to have a million plus ounces. I think if you get a million plus ounces in this neck of the woods, we're going to see some interest from producers. But really right now, what our goal is to make sure we can get our head around the fact that, there could be millions of ounces here. And the best way to do that is to do a drill program that tests areas that have never been tested to make sure you can grow that footprint.
Okay, makes sense.
Okay, so now the Gold Standard property. So we're going down to about 65 kilometers away from Fort Frances, and this is the other project that we would like to see some drilling on in 2023. Likely Q3. Again, our focus needs to be Miminiska, where we can really add value quickly. But this is a great prospect. We picked this project up in 2021 primarily for its gold, its gold prospectivity. What drew us there, you'll see those 3 gold showings in the southwest, or in the southeast. Those are old shafts that were sunk between 1901 and 1903 by the old timers. They're into quartz veins. They went down about 30 meters and they drifted to 20 to 25 meters, mining gold that is reported to be about 55 grams per ton. So pretty high grade stuff. This is 1903, so not a lot of sophisticated geological understanding at that point. Lost the veins and then abandoned the mine. What intrigued us was the fact that these had never been drilled. So, for a fairly inexpensive option, we picked up this ground. We did a little bit of research about the area, and we knew that Inco had drilled a few holes up in the north there where you can see we put the drill holes in 1969 and 1970. And they were chasing an airborne EM anomaly, and they drilled it with a Winky drill, which produces core about the size of my thumb.
Yeah.
So look, we staked that as well, just because, we were explorers. We wanted to find out, let's do a little bit more investigating what's going on up there. But our focus was the gold. So last fall, we went in and we did some sampling right around those historic shafts, and we produced some great gold results. We grabbed samples up to 166 grams per ton. So clearly some high grade stuff around there. And we decided at that point, well, look, these things have a fair amount of sulfide content. Why don't we fly an airborne EM system? Again, that's something that measures how conductive the rocks are, because sulfides tend to be fairly conductive. Just to see if we could, they're sort of twofold, see if there was a conductor associated with the gold mineralization. Also to get structural information, because that, again, structure is always important in gold mineralization and where it sits. To our surprise, we came up with this, or what returned in the data was this very large conductivity anomaly associated with these base metals showing. So there's a base metal showing in the very far north, which is copper and zinc. This is a really big conductivity anomaly, and was not what we expected to see when we flew this airborne EM system. It's almost certainly associated with what we would call a volcanogenic massive sulfide deposit. So, or system, if you will. So look, we don't know what the mineral tenor might be. There is some copper and zinc that they talk about in those historical drill holes. They were never assayed, but they noted there was chalcopyrite, which is a mineral that contains copper, and sphalerite, which is a mineral that contains zinc. So, we don't really know where those holes were. Again, 1969, 1970, the location is a little bit suspect, and there's certainly no core left, but there are indications that there could be some base metal component here. So we want to get out, we'll prospect along the length of this conductor. That's 5 kilometers of strike length, by the way, so it's very large. And then based on that prospecting and perhaps some sampling, we would go drilling in 2023, in Q3 of 2023. Great thing about this project, it's right along a forestry road. That EM anomaly is actually cut by a forestry road. So our ability to explore and sort of drill test this anomaly will be very cost effective. You can get here fairly easily, and it won't take a big chunk of change to get out here and test to see whether or not this is something of interest. If it is, it could be a company maker, but it's a very high risk target, Martin, and something that I think we need to approach with caution, but absolutely very intriguing.
And that road, that's just there touching the upper left corner there of the property, right? Is
yeah,
that you can.
It's harder to see because of the Landsat image that's in there, but that actually the road does extend right down along that northern arm, that north-south arm. Yeah, gotcha.
And this type of suspected formation, is it an easy one to kind of test? Or
yeah, it shouldn't be very hard. So the drill holes that were drilled by Inco, all less than 50 meters deep, again, with a tiny little drill, and they're starting to see mineralization right from the very top of the hole. So we don't think this is buried very deeply, which is why we want to prospect it. We'll do some hunting and see if we can't find some outcrops and get a little bit better feel for what's going on in the mineral tenor.
Gotcha. So in Q2, you're going to do some field work there, gather some more information, then hopefully the stars line up, then you can do some drilling in Q3.
Exactly.
All right. Makes sense.
So I'll just touch on the other two projects we have. I don't want to spend a lot of time or take away from the importance of the other projects, particularly Miminiska, which is our focus. But this is Keezhik. This is the other project that we're acquiring from Landor. Again, historical drilling dates back to the 1980s, but we're looking at mineable grades and mineable widths from that historical drilling. There's lots of banded iron formation here, as well as the more traditional greenstone hosted gold targets. Our idea here would be later on in the year, maybe Q3, to fly this again with an airborne EM system, develop targets that we could then sort of prospect and sample in 2024 with an eye to drilling in late 2024. So, look, this is not something where we're going to spend a lot of time or money in 2023. Again, we want to focus our energy on the low-hanging fruit of Miminiska, but it is important to always develop targets for, sort of going forward. And to do that, I think our best course of action is to use airborne geophysics this year and then follow that up in 2024 with prospecting and then potentially drilling.
All right.
And the same goes for our Attwood project. So this is the third project that we have in the Fort Hope area, the least advanced of them. This one has both gold and base metal potential. There's a copper showing up there in the northwest. There's also iron formation hosted, or iron formation throughout the property. And the government of Ontario, the Geological Survey, noted arsenopyrite associated with that iron formation. And you almost never see arsenopyrite and iron formation without there being some gold around. But again, it's not our focus for 2023. We'd like to get this thing flown with an airborne EM system so that we can develop targets that we could refine in 2024. But again, focus is Miminiska with our little wild card of Gold Standard in Q3 for drilling.
Not to focus, I don't want to distract with that one, but you got that funny line bisecting your property. I'm just curious, is that someone else who's?
No, that's a lake. It's a lake that could not be staked.
Gotcha. Okay.
So yeah, this is the summary page. I think we've sort of run across all the high points. Great projects. They're still got all that discovery potential, but there's enough meat on the bone that we know we're in the right place, and there's a really clear path to adding value. I think we've got the right people involved, both technically and from the shareholder and supportive shareholders perspective. And then, the last thing I'll show you is that rock on the right-hand side of the screen, that's core from Miminiska. That ran 40 grams per ton. That is some really sexy looking rock.
Oh. All right. So you've got the main catalyst coming up here is with the First Nations, sort of clarify the relationship there, get the approval
and get that MOU or exploration agreement. Yep.
Then with that, on the back of that, then your balance sheet's okay, but it's not enough for a drilling program.
That's right.
On the back of that, then you've de-risked it, then go back to those, sorry, how do you do it for not perpetual capital, but
durational.
Durational capital, those partners there, and presumably they've gone in this far, and then they're waiting for the next catalyst, call it, and then put in some money to put some holes in the ground.
That's right. When we recently, we did our restructuring, we did the consolidation of 1 for 4. We then raised $1 million, and that $1 million was to make the payment to Landor that was due at the end of January, but also to give us enough runway to negotiate that MOU with the First Nations, and then to get out there and market in anticipation of when that agreement comes into place, that we could raise that money that's required for drilling. And the shareholders have been very clear. Look, they like the properties. They'd like to see this MOU, and then once the MOU is signed, they're going to be back and supporting the company with another raise. So very confident that once we get that milestone with the First Nations under our belt, that we're going to be in a great position to raise the money that's required to move the project forward with drilling.
And those capital partners, did they all participate in the last round as well, or are they more legacy kind of investors? Not
all of them, some, but not all participated in the last round, all depending on sort of their ability at the time. All indicated that they continue to support the company. They are not sellers, and once things are we've got past again that milestone with First Nations, they're going to be back.
Yeah, and then after that milestone, then a little bit later, raise some money, then announce sort of the plan, more specifically details on the drilling and exploration plan for Q2.
Exactly.
And it's Northern Ontario, so what, you can sort of get into the property around in May sometime, you figure? Or
there's only a couple of times a year where it certainly is exploration. I mean, if you're into the advanced exploration, you can work 12 months a year, but through April it's breakup. It's not a great time to be there. It's also the time when the First Nations are doing a lot of duck and goose hunting, so it's those two things coinciding, not a great time for us to be operating up in there. Other than that, end of November through Christmas, I mean, you can freeze up only takes a while, but sort of mid-November through to early December, that's freeze up. So you don't really want to be there then. Weather's a bit tumultuous. But then you're into Christmas and nobody wants to be out exploring over the Christmas holiday if they don't need to be. So those are the two windows. Otherwise, we can work, throughout the seasons.
Gotcha. All right. So then in the springtime, you announce the plans, you get the team out there in May, and you start drilling May, June, and start getting some data in the summertime.
Correct. That's right.
All right. All right. Well, that sounds like a very credible plan you got going on there. All right.
Yeah, it's pretty, it's simple. It's there's no real rocket science involved. It's methodical, systematic exploration with an eye to the kind of technical thing that you need to be looking at depending on the exploration target you're looking at. So pretty straightforward, I think, Martin.
Yeah. Sounds great. All right, Bruce, thank you very much. Any final comments or you want to sort of tie a bow on it, as they say, before we wrap things up here?
No, I'm just really pleased that people are watching what we're doing. They're very encouraged by the comments that we're getting. This is an exciting project. I think there's lots of upside left for people, and particularly once that MOU is in place, we're away to the races.
Excellent. Well, on that, Bruce, thank you very much for chatting with us. Very interesting story. Have a great day, and I'm looking forward to getting you back and discussing it as the project moves forward.
Thank you very much.